The story begins as we see a room. The one with old, creepy walls and furniture that would break apart with a slight breeze. And to top it off, bugs that fly in from the ventilator from time to time. You would think it is the room of a Reddit mod. But no. If you think about it, the insects are the most fortunate bunch in there. A hand suddenly appeared out of nowhere, slapping the fly with tremendous force. The young guy opened his hand with the bug still inside, crumbled up. He brought the hand close to his mouth as he pulled his tongue out, eating the dead insect. His mind was filled with envy towards the freedom of the insect he just ate. Suddenly, his mouth curled up because of the bitter taste of the bug. Our boy, who is wearing shaggy clothes, has spent his entire life in this dilapidated basement, with the occasional bugs as his crunchy snack. The guy picked up a piece of cloth from his pocket and wiped the dirt off as he reflected on his situation. The room name is D2, and inside, our protagonist is writing something. Writing the letter, thoughts of escaping this place flooded his mind. Someday that will happen, and when it does, he can use this letter that he's writing as a self-introduction. Usually, people introduce themselves by name, but because nobody ever called him by one, he doesn't know. However, he should have one. Glancing at the portrait lying on the table, he saw a couple with the father's face blurred out due to glare. They are the guy's parents. Surely, his mom would have given him a nice name. Even though he was separated from his mother at a very young age, looking at the way she is holding him, she should have certainly loved him. His face lit up thinking about her when suddenly a creepy old man with glasses crept up behind him. She is dead, the old man spoke, almost knowing what he was thinking. Our boy's face changed to sudden terror as the old man reiterated his statement. With an angry face, he turned around, facing the old man, asking him what exactly he meant by that. With a sly smile, the old man explained that his mother jumped off a bridge right after his birth and started to laugh at the guy. As his face swelled in anger, our boy was holding it in with everything he had. This man is his father, but at the same time, he is also the deranged bastard that locked him in here so that he wouldn't escape outside. The security was tight. The room is followed by a long corridor filled with multiple doors made of galvanized square steel, the strongest around. And the keys to all that are always within his dad's grasp. With a slight smile on his face, the dad reassured our boy, telling him that he will never let him go outside and asked him if he wanted to know the cause of his mother's behavior. Annoyed and angry at the man's behavior, our boy sat there silently. Lifting up a cookie from the tray, the father shoved it right up to his face, stunning the boy. With a serious face, he explained the details. He accused the boy's mother of being afraid. Afraid of the very world she lived in because she knew that the apocalypse was coming. As he crushed the cookie into pieces, he looked at the boy, telling him that he loved him too much to let him go outside to the world that killed the boy's mother because he can't watch his own son commit suicide. Frustrated by the father's words, the boy shook in anger. He yelled in anger, accusing his father of lying to him about his mother. With his eyes wide with anger, he asked his father if the man expected him to believe such an absurd story about his mother. Telling him that it was up to him to believe it or not, the father's sight shifted to the book on the table. Stretching his hands to the book, the father grabbed it and held it over a lighter as the flames slowly burned the book. The boy cried out to the man, asking him to stop destroying the one thing that was giving him hope in this godforsaken place. But ignoring the boy's pleas, the man burned the book to a crisp and threw the rest into the trash, leaving the boy crying in pain, clutching the bin where the remnants of his hope lay. The cruel man, after doing all this, looked at the boy as he justified his actions as being for the boy's safety. He asked the boy to follow him because it was time. As they walked through that narrow corridor, thoughts came to our boy's mind. Same hour, every day. The corridor that we always pass by. Of course, in here, there are no sounds of other life forms. My dad and I are the only inhabitants of this vast basement. The same routine starts even today. The same lectures, and the same training. But there was just one more thing that allowed him to overcome this miserable life he was living. The brief time granted to him in the daily routine. During this, he would go to the basement library to read the books there. Though there are many books in the library, the ones he likes the most are the ones that describe the outside world. Stretching his hand out into the air, he let his imagination wander as he wondered how the sunlight written about in the books actually felt on the skin. Surely it was far better than the artificial lights that lit the entire bunker. The peaceful life, the beautiful scenery, and most of all, the people out there other than his father. There was a lot to do, but before all that, his first goal after escaping was something else. As our boy was lost in his mind, suddenly a kick came out of nowhere, sending him flying along with the desk he was sitting at. Surprise, it was his father. Holding the book in his hands, the father warned the boy to only read during his free time. But as he closely inspected the book's contents, a grin appeared on his face, berating the boy for still holding attachments to the outside world. Leaning over the boy lying on the ground, the man told him to drop the dream, as he was never going to go outside. Because when the apocalypse comes, the whole world will be filled with screaming and pain, and all that will be left is the ashes of the old. With an emotionless, cold look, the father continued to talk about the apocalypse. But none of it reached our boy. Clenching his teeth, he cursed the man for locking him in here for his entire life over some absurd apocalypse story. Because of that, the man continued to torment the boy all day. He had to get out of this place somehow, but this was not the time. He had to wait until his father's guard dropped, and then it would be time to pounce. We see shelves with towels placed in them, with makeshift dumbbells laying on the floor. It was the bunker gym. The boy was sweating profusely, almost at his breaking point. His father, standing on the sidelines, asked if that was all he had. He had only done 10 reps so far. The boy struggled to maintain his form as his hands shivered while a tower of weighted plates was placed on his back. That was the limit. His arms finally gave out as he crashed onto the floor, all the weights crumbling down. As the boy lay there with a crushed and frustrated look, his father stretched his hand toward him. Surprised by the sudden gesture, the boy asked him what his motive was. But finally deciding to trust him, the boy grabbed the man's hand, only to be yanked down, tripping onto the floor once again. Our guy fell for the oldest trick in the book. He tumbled and rolled across the ground, crashing into a mirror placed in a corner of the room. Looking at the boy lying on the ground, the father told him to trust nobody. Humans, especially, should not be trusted during the apocalypse. Don't just take any hand that's extended your way. That is the point of all this training and combat technique I'm teaching you. When you inevitably encounter other humans, you must be strong enough to survive even with just your bare hands. The man went on, but the boy, who had already passed out, lay there motionless. Finally reading the room for once, the old man decided to turn around, still berating the boy for being weak. He proceeded to walk out when suddenly the boy jolted up, his eyes glowing green with determination. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He grabbed a piece of broken glass from the floor and lunged forward to seize the opportunity while his dad was still off guard. He jumped up in the air, aiming to kill the man. His focus locked on the key tied to the man's pants. That was his key out of this horrible place, his only hope now. Closing the distance between them, the boy's face twisted into a smile. Finally, it worked. The shard was almost inches away from the man's head. But there was one mistake in this plan. The man's eyes opened wide, a man who had never truly let his guard down. All the planning, all this attempt, everything was doomed from the start. Terror crept across his face in the final moments as he saw his father, who had his back turned, suddenly standing directly before him, smiling. It was too late to back out now. Clutching the shard, the boy decided to go all in, swinging it straight at his father's head. But the man effortlessly sidestepped, dodging the attack, leaving the boy stunned. With swift, practiced footwork, the man pivoted, turning to face the boy. Without pausing, he raised his foot and delivered a powerful taekwondo kick to the boy's face, knocking him out instantly. The eerie silence was soon interrupted by the dripping sound of water, rousing the boy as he lay back in his bed. As he turned toward the source, the drip from the tap echoed through the room. Then he heard a sound at the door, and he turned to find his father standing there, holding the glass shard that had been used against him. Looking at the shard, the man told him to work harder, remarking that if he couldn't use his bare hands, all the training was meaningless. A sinister smile spread across his face as he announced the boy's punishment for failure. From now on, he'd have to train twice as much. The boy trembled in fear as his father turned, locked the door behind him, and left, laughing, telling the boy to get a good night's rest because tomorrow would be tough. As his father walked down the corridor, the boy sat in bed, already plotting his next move. There was one thing he knew that his father didn't. When the lights turned off, the entire room's electricity went down for a moment, and in that brief silence, if you listened closely, you could hear things you'd otherwise miss. Pressing his ear to the wall, he heard the sounds of turning wheels, chirping birds, and distant noises of the city. From this, he realized two things. Though his father insisted it was bedtime, it was actually daytime above ground, and, contrary to his father's tales, the world outside sounded peaceful. The warnings of an apocalypse that his father had drummed into him now echoed as lies. He had to escape, and above all, he needed to find his mother. His father always claimed she was dead, but now he knew nothing that came from his father's mouth could be trusted. Clenching his fists, his resolve grew stronger. He'd bide his time for now, but one day he'd find his way out to search for her. The night passed, and footsteps sounded in the corridor. Under the bright hallway lights, his father walked with a self-satisfied smile. As he approached the boy's room, his phone rang. Seeing the name River displayed, a sudden wave of terror washed over the man's face. His expression hardened as he answered, irritated, questioning why he was being contacted against his instruction to only call in emergencies. The boy slept soundly as his father conversed seriously, the minutes ticking by. Toward the end of the call, the person on the other side pleaded with the man to let him live. Hearing this, the man's phone slipped from his hand as he dropped to his knees, sobbing. Still asleep, the boy slowly awoke as the morning light shone on his face. Opening his eyes, the first thing he saw was his father, standing before him, laughing maniacally. Confused, the boy tried to stand, only to realize he was now tied tightly to a chair in an unfamiliar room. Disoriented, he shouted at his father, demanding to know what was going on. But his father ignored him, fueling his frustration. Determined, the boy strained against the ropes, managing to loosen them slightly. Seeing his small victory, he felt a glimmer of hope, but his father stepped forward, his voice icy and firm, commanding him to stop. Fear crept into the boy as he sensed the seriousness in his father's tone, but gathering his courage, he asked about the intense training his father had promised, questioning if he'd forgotten. With a stern look, his father told him that training was over, not just for today, but forever. He was to sit in that chair for the rest of his life. The boy's eyes widened in terror as he shouted, asking if he was serious. What about the apocalypse? Was he abandoning the promise of survival training? But as he continued, his father cut him off, shouting that it was over. Stunned and confused, the boy knew if he couldn't escape, he'd never have the chance to find his mother. Summoning his strength, he tugged against the ropes, slightly cracking them. Observing his defiance, his father burst into laughter. The boy watched, surprised, until his father delivered a swift kick to his face, sending him sprawling, still bound to the chair. Picking him back up, his father demanded obedience. Gritting his teeth, the boy glared defiantly, only to be kicked again, repeatedly, as thoughts raced through his mind. I should have pretended to agree, waiting for another opportunity. But in that moment, I didn't want to lose to him, even if it cost me my life. My resentment toward the man who locked me up, who made me suffer, grew stronger. At last, with one final strike, the ropes loosened, and a surge of excitement filled him. He looked at his father, imagining what it would be like to overpower the man who always looked down on him. A smile crept across his face, but as he met his father's gaze, it vanished. His father was undoubtedly angry, but something was different. Behind his rage were tears, the eyes of a sad man. The boy's energy to fight faded in an instant. Frustration grew as he struggled to understand. Why now? Why was he acting this way after all this time? Before he could make sense of it, a swift punch landed on his face, knocking him to the floor as darkness claimed him once again. He recalls his father's words, urging him to remember, above all other survival rules, the most vital one: never leave the basement. It's the safest haven, equipped with countless defense systems, self-sustaining for over a century, and fully stocked with food. Trying to leave such a well-prepared place would be inviting death. The end could come unannounced, so he must stay put. As he stirs awake, he stands and realizes his father isn't nearby. He mutters that this has never happened before. The only time his father ever disappeared was during sleep. He recalls his father's behavior from the previous day, which also seemed out of the ordinary. He slumps against the wall, thinking about his monotonous life and the current mystery. Something big, he senses, is about to happen. The constant hum of machinery stops, confirming his intuition. As the door swings open, he notices all the doors down the hall are unlocked, with no one in sight. He recognizes this as a rare chance he can't ignore. He darts forward, knowing this may be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Racing through the hallway, he notes that if his father were here, he would have stopped him already. Since he hasn't, it confirms that he's truly alone. Reaching the ladder, he glances up and mutters he's found it. He starts climbing, hoping for daylight. At the top, he pushes aside the cover and hears the sound of cars. Emerging from the hole, he squints against the brightness, and as his eyes adjust, he's stunned to see an ordinary city before him, bustling with people casually going about their lives. His heart races as he realizes he's finally made it out. A man approaches, questioning why he's standing in the middle of the road. The boy, thrilled to see another person, is met with concern as the man questions his sanity. He realizes it's too early to relax. His father might notice his absence any moment. So he bolts, trying to put as much distance as possible. He whispers that he's dreamed of this moment, to escape the basement and finally be free. Just minutes earlier, it seemed impossible, but now he's free, though something feels strange. Why did the door open so suddenly? He stops, puzzled. Maybe it was a malfunction, but he doubts his father would allow such an error. Could his father have planned this? He shakes his head, rejecting the thought. His father was the one who made the rule about staying in the basement. Looking around, he sees people living ordinary lives. Students, children playing, smiles everywhere. These could have been his experiences if his father hadn't misled him. There is no apocalypse here, just peace. Realizing the fears he held were needless, he feels relief. But soon, the laughter is drowned by the sound of wings, and a single thought echoes in his mind. The end finds them all without warning. Birds rise into the sky as people stare upward, shocked. A balloon momentarily blocks his view, then drifts to reveal something ominous blocking the sun. People stare as a mysterious form in the sky starts to swirl. As it comes closer, tentacles extend toward Earth, causing panic. Some people suggest it might be the moon, but he knows better. It's a monstrous eye watching them all. And it's not alone. The tentacles are swarms of creatures charging down. He recalls his father's warning. Never leave unless the basement's location is exposed to the enemy. The monsters make straight for the basement, cramming inside before spreading out over the surface. Onlookers, frozen in disbelief, watch as one is grabbed by a tentacled creature. No one runs as the creature devours its victim, tossing the man's head across the ground, where it rolls before the crowd, triggering panic. Screams erupt as everyone begins to flee, but some trip, while one boy stands, oblivious with headphones on. From above, something flies. It's a rock hurled by a massive figure. People scatter to avoid the barrage. Another spiked creature descends, tearing people in half effortlessly. Monsters of all kinds emerge, ending lives without hesitation. Amidst the chaos, the boy recalls his father's prediction. The apocalypse would bring a world filled with blood and screams, reduced to ashes. The once peaceful city has transformed into a nightmare. The boy watches in horror as colossal creatures trample buildings. This relentless monster parade makes it clear their normal lives are over. Seeing the extent of destruction, he realizes his father's warnings were true. Standing frozen, he wonders if his father wasn't lying about everything, including his mother's fate. As the wave of monsters swarms closer, a hand grabs him, pulling him to safety. It's his father. He asks how he found him, but his father only tells him to run and not stop. Monsters pursue them, and as they round a corner, they encounter even more. His father leaps over a railing, urging him to follow. Together, they push against the fleeing crowd, heading toward a distant bridge. Monsters of all shapes and sizes attack civilians, some apparently just for sport. The boy keeps running, but some people stop to watch the carnage. As they move further up the bridge, he glances back and realizes no one is left. They've all been caught in the monster wave. He tells his father they're closing in, but his father insists they keep running, as it's the only way out. The bridge spans a deep canyon, likely caused by the destruction below. The monster wave sweeps up everything in its path and starts up the bridge, moving fast. He warns his father of the monsters closing in but is halted as one latches onto his foot, gripping it painfully and squeezing until it starts to hurt. He grits his teeth, knowing that if he doesn't shake it off now, he won't survive. His father, however, pulls up with a car door and slices through the creature's arm, making it scream and plummet from the bridge. Grasping his ankle, the boy looks to his father, who sees that his foot is injured. The bridge begins to tremble as the wave of monsters races toward them, and the boy tries to rise, realizing that the gap between them and the creatures is closing, no matter how hard he runs. He stumbles, falling to the ground, and as the wave approaches, he finds his father staring at him. His father urges him to go, saying he can save himself if he keeps moving. The boy thinks, defeated, that this is what he expected. His father always seemed to ignore him. But instead of walking away, his father extends a hand and asks why he isn't getting up. Confused, the boy questions why his father isn't leaving him behind. His father simply replies that he can make it because he has a plan. Surprised, the boy mutters that he can't believe his father really has a plan, but his father gives him a steady, trusting look. Swallowing his doubts, the boy reaches up and takes his father's hand, who pulls him up, telling him to run. As he sprints, he feels something in his hand and turns to ask about it, but his father shouts that there's no time to explain and to just get off the bridge. The boy nods and pushes forward, but the bridge begins shaking even more violently. Looking back, he sees the shadows of monsters and watches as the beams holding the bridge start to break under their weight, the cables snapping as the bridge begins to collapse. Monsters and, possibly, his father tumble into the canyon below. The boy stands there, calling out for his father, wondering what happened or if he's okay. Recalling his father's mention of a plan, he questions if this was all part of it, wondering why his father would go to such lengths after years of hardship. As he collapses in despair, he realizes he's survived. But for what purpose? Everything he had dreamed of for a life above ground now feels hollow. There's no peace, no beauty, and his most cherished goal of finding his mother seems like a distant dream. He cries, wishing he could ask why his father had saved him after everything. Unsure of his next steps, he feels trapped in a worse hell than the basement he grew up in. Remembering his father's help and the note he'd given him, the boy looks at his hand and slowly unfolds the note. Staring at it, his tears stop, but his focus is broken as a monster crawls up the cliff edge. Terrified, he tries to run, but pain flares in his leg. Clutching the railing, he realizes the monster is closing in, and soon they both tumble off the bridge. Rolling on the ground, he sees the monster also struggling to regain its footing. Exhausted, he tries to stand but finds his strength depleted. As the monster rises, he tells himself he can't escape. Despair grips him, but with the note still in his hand, he suddenly finds a spark of hope reignite. Now that he has something worth fighting for, adrenaline surges through his body, and he stands vowing he won't give up. He'll find his mother. But first, he faces the question of how to deal with the creature looming before him. He recalls a lesson from his father about survival knowledge. As the monster charges, he remembers his father saying that survival is a race against time. The monster lunges, and he asks himself how he can win if all his father's lessons were right and he's doomed to be outmatched. As the creature's fist swings toward him, time seems to slow, and his father's voice echoes in his mind, asking if he's forgotten everything he's been taught. Techniques for countering flash through his memory, and he sidesteps the punch, leaping behind the monster, which stumbles toward the cliff edge. He's surprised by his own reflexes as he realizes he dodged the attack. Preparing for the next assault, he remembers his father saying he's different. The main difference is that he knows exactly what he needs to do to survive. It's been ingrained in him. Calming his nerves, he lowers into a fighting stance as the monster charges again. This time, it swings, but the boy slides beneath, grabbing hold of a spike lodged in the ground. He pulls it free, then charges forward, evading the monster's grasp and driving the spike straight through its head. Meanwhile, in the ruins of the city, monsters have completely overrun the landscape. Underground, a group of survivors discusses their predicament, with some lamenting that no help has arrived, despite days passing. Their food supplies are running low. A girl named Essie tries to lift their spirits, saying they should remain hopeful. Another survivor tells her she's unsettling everyone, but she insists she's not speaking loudly. He murmurs it isn't her tone that's unsettling as he eyes their motionless friend, likely already lost to despair. He leaves, mumbling that he feels his sanity slipping. A young girl approaches him, saying she can't find food anywhere. He tells her they need to keep searching if they hope to survive. She mentions a spot she hasn't checked, saying she'll try again and not to lose hope. Smiling, he thanks her, calling her a good kid, but she shakes her head, downplaying it. He says they need to stay optimistic and try to get everyone out of here. She, speechless, moves over to two other survivors. She asks if they've found any food, and they pull out a sandwich, claiming to have found it earlier. She reaches for the bag, and one girl warns her to stop, but they quickly eat it. Frustrated, she reminds them they agreed to share the food, but one replies that it was the boring people's decision, not theirs. She snaps that they ate from the shared rations just yesterday, but the man shrugs, feigning ignorance. Annoyed, she threatens to report them, but the man stands, saying she's welcome to try. They won't just stand by. She retorts that she's too fast for them to catch, hinting that running away is her specialty. Just as he moves toward her, a distant scream halts them, and fear tightens in the air. The woman mutters that the sound came from far away, so they should be safe, for now. The man laughs nervously, saying he got scared for no reason, then notices the schoolgirl trembling on the floor. Just moments earlier, she was so self-assured, yet now she's too frightened to move. She spots some food left behind by the others and quickly slips away with it. Returning to the man she spoke to earlier, he asks if she checked the area he pointed out. She nods, and he asks if she found anything. We see the food tucked in her pocket, but her stomach grumbles, and she replies that she came up empty-handed. He sighs, saying he's not surprised and reminding her that, for now, they're still alive, though that might not last long, as a monster suddenly crashes into the room. The schoolgirl is knocked to the ground but gets up, petrified, as she sees the monster looming behind the man. He reaches out to her, pleading for help, but she runs, apologizing over her shoulder. The man calls after her, but she shouts back that she told him before. She's not a good person. As he's overtaken by the creature, the couple from earlier make a break for it too. They spot the schoolgirl sprinting toward another monster, and the woman remarks that they can just use her as a distraction. Running ahead, the girl rolls her eyes, calling them idiots. The monster swings at her, but she hasn't given up. She dives forward, rolling and landing in a perfect acrobatic move, surprising the others with her agility. They watch, stunned, as she lands flawlessly, remembering her claim about being good at running away. Just then, the couple is caught and devoured by the monster. Meanwhile, she finds cover and collapses, gasping for breath, hoping the creatures will leave her alone. She looks over and is startled to see a boy lying nearby. She screams and pushes him, thinking he's a corpse, but he mutters in response, and she realizes he's alive. Right in front of them, however, is another monster. She holds her breath, hoping it didn't hear her scream, but it begins crawling toward them. She sees the boy lying still and, in a panic, grabs him by the collar, dragging him to a safer hiding spot. As the monster finally moves away, she breathes a sigh of relief, muttering her thanks for their escape. Looking down, she notices the boy is now awake, and she screams again, causing him to jump back, startled, asking who she is and what she was doing. Confused, she tries to explain, but he can only think of his father's warning not to trust anyone. She insists that she saved him from the monster, but he mutters that his father might have been right, that he shouldn't get close to others. He questions how he can believe her, but his stomach grumbles, and he slumps, admitting he's starving. He confesses he last ate 5 days ago in the basement and has been trying to conserve his energy. She quickly says she doesn't have any food, and he looks at her, confused, pointing out that he didn't ask. Flustered, she stammers that he just seemed hungry, then nervously shifts as a piece of food falls from her pocket. He notices and asks what it is, clearly unfamiliar with the sight. She tries to cover up, claiming it's nothing, but he stares at it hungrily, asking if it's food. She hurriedly denies it, and he backs off, saying he must have been mistaken. Trying to regain control, she scoffs at him for not knowing what food looks like, considering how it might be her chance to escape. He glares, calling her out as a liar, asking if she thought he'd really believe her. Caught off guard, she realizes he might be sharper than she'd assumed. He observes her reaction and figures out that it must be food. Seeing that he's serious, she reluctantly hands him half, telling him that's all she can spare. He's puzzled by her generosity, pointing out that it leaves her disadvantaged. She replies that he owes her 4 times the amount in return and not to forget it. He agrees, eating his portion, then turns to leave. She asks where he's going, and he says now that he's eaten, he's moving on. She questions where he thinks he can go in these circumstances, reminding him that this is her neighborhood and she knows it well. Monsters are everywhere, making escape almost impossible. He pauses, then asks if she really knows the area as well as she claims. She nods, explaining she grew up there, and he asks if she knows where the subway is. Reluctantly, she agrees to help and begins leading the way. As they sneak around, she wonders how she got roped into this, thinking if she'd known, she might have kept her bread. Curious, she asks why he wants the subway. He explains that it's safe, stocked with supplies, a path out of the monster's view, and that it masks human presence from the creatures. She raises an eyebrow, noting how strange he is, especially given he couldn't even recognize bread. They finally arrive, but she's momentarily lost, unable to find the entrance. He questions if she's misleading him, but she insists she's trying to remember the way. Suddenly, an elderly man appears, startling her. He warns her to keep quiet, saying he hadn't expected to find humans here. The boy asks who he is, and the old man chuckles, saying they can save introductions for later and to follow him. The girl hesitates, asking where he's leading them, but he reassures her, saying it's what they were searching for. He guides them through the rubble and down an escalator, revealing the subway they sought. The girl marvels at the crowd of people hiding there, amazed to see so many survivors. The man explains how, when the monsters appeared, he knew escape options were slim but found this place by sheer luck. He's been scavenging on the surface for medicine, which is why he overheard them. The boy looks around, thinking he once planned a subway in his own base, though he wasn't expecting to find this many people here. Observing the crowd, he notes that people exhibit various behaviors. Some are desperate, others reveal darker sides, and there are even a few he can't quite read. Although the number of people adds risks, he instinctively feels that no one here poses a real threat. He can sense danger, much like with the monsters outside, and none of these humans give off that kind of aura. For once, he considers that it might be safe to stay, even if any of them turn against him. Just then, the old man interrupts his thoughts, saying it's time for introductions, revealing his name as Huang Bom, a doctor. Bom explains he was looking for medicine when he heard them and couldn't return empty-handed, then asks for their names. The boy doesn't respond, so the girl steps forward, introducing herself as Haru. Bom smiles, noting that she must attend virtual middle school based on her uniform. She nods, surprised he knows, and he explains his hospital was right near her school. Haru frowns, saying she doesn't remember a hospital there. Bom turns to the boy, noticing his tattered clothes, and asks his name. The boy hesitates, eventually saying he doesn't have one. Bom laughs, thinking it's a joke, and tells him he can share his name next time, chuckling at the mystery. A man bursts into the room, declaring that the situation has worsened. Nearby, an injured man leans against the wall, relieved to see Bom. Bom inspects his wound and notes that the infection is progressing faster than anticipated, saying they need to perform surgery immediately. Pulling out his surgical tools, he begins disinfecting the wound. Observing this, the boy mentions that he's read about doctors in books, describing them as professionals who heal people for a fee. But in this apocalypse, where money holds no value, he asks Bom what he's getting in return. Bom, surprised, replies that he doesn't expect anything. The others are caught off guard by his response, and Bom explains that a doctor's duty is to help the injured without worrying about payment. The wounded man, overwhelmed with gratitude, hugs Bom. The boy, confused, wonders aloud why Bom would help without expecting something back. He can't decide if humans are foolish or if this is simply something they do. Bom smiles, warning the man to be careful with his movements. The man, seeing veterinarian on Bom's jacket, suddenly hesitates, asking how a vet can perform surgery on humans. Bom assures him, saying humans are technically animals too. The man panics, expressing second thoughts, but Bom insists, saying if they don't proceed, the infection could be fatal. The man, now desperate, asks for anesthesia, but a girl nearby admits they don't have any. Unfazed, the doctor picks up a brick and tells him that it is bedtime. Watching from a distance, the boy mutters to himself that he was right, humans really are dangerous. Later, the boy finds a quiet corner and reflects, thinking he made the right call by not watching the surgery. With little else, he examines a photo he's kept from his childhood, with a note on the back saying, "She is alive." The image unsettles him, though, as he notices alien-like flowers in the background. An odd detail he couldn't find in any botany book even during his time in the basement. If the strange flower grows only in certain areas, it could be the key to finding where the picture was taken. Realizing he needs someone knowledgeable to identify it, he tells himself to guard it closely, as it's his only clue. Suddenly, a bug flies near his face. He smashes it, then, out of habit, tastes it, grimacing at the bitter flavor. Elsewhere, in another room, a girl reports to her boss that she's gathered everyone. The man, who bears a scar, nods, saying it's time to begin. He orders his followers to round up the others and warns that if they resist, they should use any means necessary. The crowd murmurs in confusion, questioning why they've been forcefully gathered without explanation. One person, emboldened, confronts the scarred man, but his glare instantly silences him, sending a chill down his spine. Scar, as he's called, claims he can peer into the depths of people's minds, reading their true thoughts in their eyes. He notes that this man's bravado masks deep-seated fear, which he's hiding behind a tough exterior. As the man protests, Scar approaches and punches him in the gut, sending him flying. The crowd falls silent, fear spreading as Scar walks back, picking the man up and savoring his terrified expression. He admits that he enjoys seeing people's fear. His subordinate informs him that several people are missing. An old man, a boy, a girl, and the injured man. Irritated, he asks who was responsible, and she replies that it was entrusted to a thug who ignored orders and vanished. Scar grumbles that they've never managed to control that guy and decides to handle it himself. He wants to look into the eyes of everyone here. When asked what to do with the defiant man on the ground, Scar coldly orders his followers to throw him out. The man, desperate, pleads that he'll cooperate, but Scar ignores him and begins heading toward the boy's area. Meanwhile, the boy, lying on the floor, awakens from a fitful sleep. He mutters that he hasn't had a decent rest in days, needing to stay alert against the monsters. Disoriented, he presses down, but he feels nothing beneath him, as if the ground itself is vanishing. Sweat trickles down his face as he senses something closing in around him, binding his arms and neck. He tries to break free, but it tightens, enclosing him completely, and he screams, only to jolt awake, realizing it was a nightmare. Regaining his senses, he's alarmed to find Scar and his henchmen standing before him. He demands to know who they are, and Scar informs him he has 2 minutes to get to the center of the station, or else he'll be thrown out. One of Scar's underlings warns him to hurry, saying it could be risky if he doesn't comply. The boy stands, and Scar remarks that he was curious to see who was hiding but feels it's a waste of time. The boy challenges Scar, asking if he really plans to expel him, which provokes one of the henchmen to snarl. But Scar silences him, saying he wants to do this the fun way. Staring into the boy's eyes, Scar tries to gauge his true emotions. However, instead of fear, Scar finds himself overwhelmed by something indescribable within the boy's gaze. Speechless, he pulls back, while his henchman, Mole, snickers, taunting that the boy should have taken their offer to leave. The boy simply responds, 2 seconds is all I need to handle you. Mole laughs, finding the boy's confidence amusing, and draws a knife, asking if those are his final words. Scar places a hand on Mole's shoulder to stop him, but the boy suddenly realizes something is missing, his photo. Mole notices his concern and taunts him, holding up the picture. Furious, the boy strides forward, threatening to kill them if they've damaged the photo. Mole breaks into a cold sweat, sensing the boy's intensity, while Scar warns him that if he moves any closer, he'll rip the photo to shreds. Mole lands a blow on the boy, taunting that his confidence has vanished. The boy mentally chastises himself for letting his guard down during sleep, reaffirming his belief that humans are even more dangerous than monsters. Mole turns to Scar, asking what they should do next and if they should throw the boy out. Scar, however, has changed his mind, saying he'll keep him around. Mole is puzzled, but Scar explains that when he looked into the boy's eyes, he saw something different, a depth so profound he couldn't perceive anything. He orders Mole to hold onto the photo and keep it visible whenever they're watching the boy. Mole reluctantly agrees, admitting that while the boy's threat shook him, it no longer matters as long as they have the photo. Just then, Haru walks into the room and freezes, surprised by the scene. She nervously asks what they want with her, and Scar tells her she saved him the trouble of tracking her down. Panicking, she asks why they're after her. Scar calmly instructs her to report to the center of the station. Mole and the others move to leave, with Mole taunting the boy, saying he'll take care of the photo for him. As Haru sees the boy sitting alone, she approaches him, asking if he's okay, but he swats her hand away. Frustrated, she grits her teeth, saying she was just trying to help him up. He retorts that he doesn't need her help and tells her to move, calling her human. Haru huffs, reminding him her name isn't human and that he should remember it. He brushes past her, questioning if he really needs to remember something so trivial. Noticing the tension, BOM approaches and asks Haru if something happened. She snaps, saying no, and calls herself foolish for trying to talk to someone who clearly didn't want it. The boy quietly reflects, wondering why he'd even consider holding a human's hand. His father had always warned him never to trust anyone who reached out, as humans were his enemies. Then he notices Mole holding his precious photo, thinking it would be simpler to take it back by force, but he doesn't want to risk damaging the only item he brought from the basement. He decides to wait for an opportunity to retrieve it. Scar, meanwhile, gathers everyone and announces they have 2 choices: follow him or face the consequences. Those who choose to follow won't have to worry about being thrown out, like the man he'd expelled earlier. Pointing to the injured man, he states that anyone trying to disrupt the peace will be dealt with. Though he won't force anyone to follow him, he emphasizes that his word is now law here. The group nervously watches one another, slowly gravitating towards Scar's side. Bohem watches this unfold, muttering that in a world without rules, power decides fate. Scar may not explicitly order people to follow, but his implication is clear, making it the logical choice for survival. Sweating nervously, Bohem smiles faintly, adjusting his tie, and muses that perhaps he's lived long enough to take a stand. He chooses to remain independent, knowing he might be the only one capable of helping others when they truly need it. To his surprise, Haru stays back as well. Surprised, he asks if she doesn't plan to join, and she shrugs, saying she's not interested. He advises her to reconsider, calling it reckless, but she laughs, pointing out that she's not the only one holding back. Bohem turns and realizes the boy and several others have also refrained from joining Scar. Nearby, a young woman with freckles anxiously confides in another girl, wondering why nobody informed her about staying here. She fears they'll be forced into Scar's group and worries about potential torture. Another girl tries to reassure her, saying it likely won't be that extreme. They'd probably be kicked out or starved rather than tortured. Freckles shivers, fearing the worst. Suddenly, a young girl bumps into Bohem, and a man nearby apologizes, saying he should have held on to her. Bohem chuckles, noting she's at that age, and tells her to listen to her guardian. The girl stares at him defiantly, then headbutts him, declaring that he's not her father. The man sighs, explaining that while he's not her parent, he's looking out for her until they find her real family. As they chat, some men nearby spot the boy entering the room. One warns him that Scar has prohibited entry and that he won't make an exception just because he's young. Ignoring them, the boy scans the room, looking for Mole, who holds his photo. Elsewhere, people ration supplies. A woman with glasses was grumbling about the portions being smaller for their group. He's informed that they receive less because they aren't doing anything, so they don't need much food. The aroma of the food wafts toward another man, who sniffs the air cartoonishly, asking if it's mealtime. Another man searches for Mohawk, Scar's right-hand man, a volatile character rumored to be a psychopath who kills with a smile. Nearby, the young girl from earlier accidentally bumps into Mohawk, spilling her food. She looks up nervously as he glares down at her, his clothes now stained. He tells her to follow him, handing her a replacement tray of food and surprising onlookers, who murmur that he might be torturing her in his own way. Her temporary guardian quickly intervenes, pulling her behind him and questioning what she did wrong. Annoyed, Mohawk growls, demanding to know why he's asking such a question, and the guardian quickly ushers her away. The girl looks back at Mohawk as he watches them leave, an eerie smile on his face. Later, Freckles confides in Haru, mentioning that surveillance has increased around the station. The boy, still focused on retrieving his photo, spots Haru and notices her annoyed expression, recalling their earlier interaction. Freckles observes the tension and, later that night, when everyone else is asleep, she sees the boy sitting alone in a corner. She quietly approaches, reaching out to touch his arm, only for him to grab her wrist firmly, startling her. She winces, surprised he was awake, and he accuses her of planning to attack him while he slept. Struggling to free herself, she tells him he's hurting her and insists she just wanted to talk. He eyes her suspiciously, asking what she means by talk. Freckles realizes he's never really had a conversation before. With a confused expression, he bluntly asks why it matters if he's had conversations, as if it's irrelevant. As he releases her wrist, she takes a breath and finally gets to the point, asking why he always keeps to himself. Then she asks if he's just shy, to which he responds irritably, calling her words nonsense and declaring that he has no reason to get close to an enemy. Freckles, curious, presses him on what he means. He bluntly states that he considers all humans his enemy and sees no reason to befriend people who might betray him. Freckles assures him she has no plans to hurt him, but he says he can't trust her. She might be lying. She shrugs, acknowledging his distrust but asks if he can at least make peace with Haru. Confused, he says they haven't fought, so there's no need to reconcile. Freckles asks if he'd consider getting along with Haru, but he dismisses the idea, saying she's human, and that's all he needs to know. Freckles sighs, telling him that Haru cries herself to sleep every night, muffling her sobs so no one will hear. She suggests that Haru, like everyone else here, is carrying a lot of pain she can't express. She notes that everyone here might be dealing with their own pain, and since he's the same age as her, maybe trying to get along would make things better for both of them. Boy, unmoved by Freckles' plea for understanding, dismisses sadness as something only weak humans indulge in. He tells her that if people have the time to feel sad, they'd be better off using it to figure out how to survive. Freckles raises an eyebrow, asking if he's never felt sadness after losing someone important. He recalls his father saving him on the bridge but answers that he hasn't, and he never will, because he has no close attachments. Freckles sighs, saying that not having anyone to miss makes it sound like he's incredibly lonely now, and probably will be for a long time. She adds that if he ever did die, she'd be sad for him. Surprised by her words, Boy replies that it's unnecessary since he doesn't plan on dying and wouldn't care if she did. She laughs, calling him cold, before a fit of coughing interrupts her. Boam begins to stir awake nearby, and Freckles chuckles, saying maybe she talked too much but assures him she won't bother anymore. Bidding him sweet dreams, Boy watches her go, thinking she's a strange human. In another part of the shelter, Glasses pretends to be asleep, muttering under his breath about how exhausting this all is.